Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Hillary McBride about what it means to be a powerful woman, the complexities of shame, and how our body image can impact our kids.
Nobody else gets to define her worth, which means that if somebody insults her, that she can say, that's actually probably more about you than it is about me, and that doesn't take away from my sense of being valuable. I remember feeling growing up like my mom was so good at attending to me and showing up and defending and protecting and loving and disciplining and doing all those things, but I would think, I wonder what my mom would watch on TV if nobody was around.
According to psychologists, one of the most powerful master emotions that impacts everything we do, from how we respond to conflict to how we dress and the ways we parent our kids, is shame. Shame is the residue that gets left behind when we don't feel like we're enough, or like we're exposed and vulnerable, or we fail at something, or behave in a way that we wish we hadn't. And the crazy part about shame is that it starts early on in our development as human beings. I talked with a friend the other day who at 22, and this is totally TMI, but I'm sharing it anyway because we're friends. She realized at 22 that her lifelong issues with constipation stemmed back to being 3 and feeling ashamed that she had an accident in her pants even though she was supposed to already be potty trained. Once she recognized that it was shame she felt 19 years before, her chronic constipation cleared up. Now, I know this sounds a little crazy, but researchers tell us that as human beings, we can pick up habits and ways of being in the world that are directly related to a moment when we felt shame, and then not even realize how that feeling of shame has impacted our day-to-day lives years later. Like a woman I know who didn't wear shorts for 40 years because she didn't like her knees. She didn't swim with her kids, didn't know what it felt like to have warm sun on her legs. She would only make love to her husband in the dark, and all because she couldn't get over her perfectly normal knees. And this whole thing started when she was 12 years old, and someone briefly in conversation mentioned that she had funny-looking knees, and she has been embarrassed about it ever since. She missed out on so many beautiful moments because of shame. Which is why this last year, I have had a motto that I've been using to help me remember that shame and fear will not control my actions or make me miss out on cool experiences. So this is my motto. The motto is, do it anyway. And here's how it plays out. I think to myself, I would love to play in the ocean with my kids, but I don't feel confident in a bathing suit. Do it anyway. I don't feel like a good enough speaker to present at this big event. Do it anyway. I really want to invite my neighbors over for dinner, but I feel really insecure about cooking. Do it anyway. Because here's the thing. Shame, while helpful at times, is more often the single emotion that's holding us back from doing the thing that brings us the joy and fulfillment we have been longing for. Which is why I'm so excited to talk with Hillary McBride today. Hillary McBride is a therapist, researcher, speaker, and writer, and she's also the host of the Other People's Problems podcast and co-host of the Liturgist podcast, one of my favorites. One thing I love about Hillary is that she shares hope like she's throwing out candy at a parade. She's a wise soul whose thoughtfulness and deep thinking is helping all of us experience wholeness like never before. She tackles tough topics like shame in winsome ways and brings a fresh perspective to tired conversations. And so without further ado, here's my friend, Hillary McBride. Okay, Hillary, I got a kick out of one of the reviews of your book. Your book's called Mothers, Daughters, and Body Image. And I was looking at it on Amazon, and someone said that it is filled with great actual advice for learning to love yourself without all of the empty self-help or religious crap a lot of books out there have. And that is, it's also a must read for any human, which in my opinion is a pretty legit review, right?
That's amazing. I don't read reviews just as a way of kind of protecting my creativity and protecting my voice. And so I love that's out there.
I just thought it was so freaking awesome. But okay, so here's my question. How do we learn to love our body as it is right now in this present moment?
I like what you said about this present moment. And I think that's one of the gateways into it, is to slow down and to be in our body in this moment and sensing and feeling and appreciating everything that it means to be a body. Now, what that doesn't mean is it doesn't mean perpetually focusing on the external appearance, but rather shifting our awareness away from things like, how does my hair look, or is my eyeliner smudged, or I didn't get to fix my hair the way that I wanted to before I left the house, but moving towards the inner experience of our body. So what does my body do for me in this moment? What do my body and I do together? Well, how did I get to this moment? I walked to work this morning. I walked to my office, and thank you, legs, for taking me all of the way from my home to my office and for allowing me to walk through the streets on the way here. And eyes, thank you for showing me the cherry blossoms that were on the trees. And nose, thank you for helping me smell spring. And really moving into a sensory dimension of relationship with our body, where we are focusing on the things that our body is and does, not just on the outside evaluation of how we appear to others. So for so many of us as women, particularly for some groups of people, for some specific subcultures in North America, we see that the focus on appearance is everything, which means I need to look okay. I need to look how I'm supposed to look. Otherwise, what's the point of leaving the house? What's the point of even being seen? And what I want to say is appearance is great. I mean, good. It's one dimension of being you, but there's all of this other stuff about being you and being human and being a body and experiencing that from the inside out can shift us away from this sense of always feeling like we are not quite measuring up to what we're supposed to look like.
And that is such a huge gift, because we get to live freer and more whole and enjoy ourselves more, which translates into the people around us, I'm assuming. So how does our body image impact our kids? And I'm curious if there's a difference between how it impacts our sons and daughters. Is there a difference there, or is it kind of the same hand-me-down messaging that we give to either gender?
Right. So I'll start with the first question, which is, how does our body image impact our kids? And the good news is that moms are powerful sources of influence on their children. I think that's where a lot of the mom guilt comes from sometimes, is knowing that you might even be, to some degree, the single most important influence on your children's life, in addition to community and the other parent and the grandparents and all of the other dimensions of growing up as a human and all of the sources of influence. But moms often spend the most time in direct contact with their children of any person. And we know that parents communicate messages about bodies in two ways. One of those is direct communication, and the other one is modeling. So direct communication would be things like, don't wear that. That's not good to wear. It's not good for your body type. Or you look chubby, or you look beautiful because you did XYZ to your appearance. So we communicate messages about bodies very explicitly using language, but then modeling is the other way that we pass down body image narratives. So one of the things that shows up in research is when actually girls are asked, what messages were you given about food and body image growing up? And they would say things like, well, my mom said all of the right things, but I noticed at dinner time, she would give 2 scoops of food to dad, 2 scoops to my brother, but 1 scoop to herself and 1 scoop to me. And so I learned through modeling that, boys get more food and that girls should watch what they eat, and because they need to take care of their appearance and take care of their image. So body images, messages are communicated in some tricky ways. A lot of times parents are communicating narratives about bodies and they don't even realize it. In one of my studies, it showed up that girls had memories of their moms standing in front of the mirror, pulling out their fat, pulling out outfits and saying this, I can't wear this, I'm too chubby. And they're not actually noticing that their daughters are sitting there listening to them, hearing all of those things, and that's the story of womanhood that they're being fed about, what this is the best way to talk to yourself when you grow up. So, parents are one of the most significant sources of body image and messages about bodies. The other two are media and peers. So, what do our friends say about us, and kids teasing or communicating things that they learn at home, as well as what are kids seeing in the media. But the most significant source is actually parents, and mothers in particular, because mothers are spending the most time with their kids. Now, that might change as we see things like shared parental leave or more stay-at-home dads and more working moms. And perhaps we'll have to do some more research in the future about how things change when that's the case. But what we see about mothers and daughters versus mothers and sons is that mothers are often raising their daughters and from an experience of sameness, whereas mothers raise sons from experience of otherness. And this shows up in research all the way back to the 70s. Nancy Chodorow was a feminist psychologist who looked at how girls grow up seeing the world through a lens of relationality because of a sense of sameness with their mothers. And so there's a sense of, I am like you, and how are we connected, which is what shapes this kind of relationality among women. Whereas boys grow up with a mother and say to themselves, I am not like you because my body looks more like dad's body. My body looks more like my brother's body. And so the relationship between men and women starts there with a sense of, I see us as being different. And then as boys grow up, this shapes their sense of perhaps individuality or their sense of wanting to preserve autonomy and independence, whereas girls tend to favor relationality and the primary sense of security, which is in relationship instead of in individuality or autonomy. So what we know is that mothers are the primary source of influence on their kids' body image, but the link seems to be stronger between mothers and daughters than mothers and sons. Although what we know is that fathers tend to be not really spoken of as a source of influence on body image for either boys or girls, but when they are spoken as a source of influence, they're spoken as a negative one. So unfortunately, most of our research says that dads aren't necessarily a positive influence on girls or a boy's body image, but we just might need more research on that. However, what we see is that fathers are actually a more important source of influence on boys' emotional health, because men pass between men the story about what does it mean to be a healthy male. And so dads are often guilty of saying things like, boys don't cry, smarten up, don't be a little girl. And so moms tend to pass on to their daughters a sense of sameness and a sense of, you are like me, but also this is what it means to be a woman in a body. And dads are passing on to sons stories about masculinity and what does it mean to be a male in the world.
So, in light of our current cultural climate, particularly in the West, there's so much opportunity right now to teach our girls about using their voices in powerful ways, and also teaching ourselves about that as well, and our own influence in more powerful ways. And so, how would you define what it means to be a powerful woman?
Well, I think my definition of power, we'll start there, is different than the way that power has actually been constructed in Western and largely patriarchal society. So when we look at power as it shows up in circles of males and masculinity, we see power as having been constructed as power over. So I know that I'm powerful if I'm more powerful than you. I know that I'm smart if I'm more smart than you. I know if I'm valuable if I'm more valuable than you. So there's this kind of hierarchy that's created. And what that does is it diminishes the other. And we only see that we're valuable if somebody is less valuable than us. We only see if we're powerful if someone is less powerful than us. But the way that we see power as being defined in feminist literature and feminist theories, that power in a feminist perspective is power with, which means that we are stronger together. So there is a sense of joining with and a sense of having a shared version of access, of voice, of everybody's welcome at the table, and we are more powerful when there is more of us, which is that another way of saying my life is enriched when you are with me and I am with you. And that's what creates power, is that we are together in something. So a powerful woman from that perspective to me means somebody who is who is connected, who is seen and known by her peers and by her circle of friends, and builds others up. I think that's a powerful woman. A powerful woman is somebody who knows how to give voice to the people who have had their voices taken away and can say, I'm going to be aware of my power and my privilege, and I'm going to use that to help you feel known and seen and like you matter. So it's about sharing power. And I think a powerful woman is someone who knows that nobody else gets to define her worth, which means that if somebody insults her, that she can say, that's actually probably more about you than it is about me. And that doesn't take away from my sense of being valuable. I would add to that, a powerful woman knows that her body and her sexuality is not the only way to get value, that those are valuable parts of her because they are part of her. But I don't think that you need to use your sexuality or use your appearance to feel like you matter. So knowing that you have power within, and power really is, when you think about what that word means, when we're not talking about social dynamics and social power, it means the potential to accomplish. Just like there's power in my light switch, and when I turn my light switch on, it means that I know that the lights are going to work. So the potential to enact change, the potential to have a voice, the potential to participate. And so even seeing power as something that is located within us, that because we have Imago Dei, because we have the image of God in us, that we're created in God's image, that we actually have, and because we have the Spirit in us, that there is so much power that we carry within us. And that's not about if I can hurt another person or make them listen to me or make them do what I want, but rather feeling like we have the capacity to do meaningful and beautiful things in this world. And so if we're going to use our power, then let's find what our calling is and move towards that. That to me feels powerful.
So let's talk a little bit about identity. And especially, I think, when we bring children into the world or adopt children into our life.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'll talk about for myself. I find myself doing a dance between my identity as a woman and my identity as a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have any ways to integrate those two parts of ourselves? And for someone else, it might be two different things, different names on those identities. But how do we integrate when we feel divided?
I think, first of all, naming what you're naming is so important, that so many people feel pulled apart and actually feel like they have to sacrifice their woman identity for their mother identity. So they feel like they lose the space to think about the things that they want, the things that they like. I remember feeling growing up like my mom was so good at attending to me and showing up and defending and protecting and loving and disciplining and doing all those things. But I would think, I wonder what my mom would watch on TV if nobody was around. And I couldn't ever come up with the idea, because it felt like in some ways my mom had been such a good mother that she had sacrificed her sense of self, her individualness. And so making space to protect the individual piece is really important. I actually think of it as being a preventative intervention, because what I often see for women in therapy is that they come in around the time that they're empty nesting and they think, my individual and my woman muscles have atrophied. I have lost my ability to know who I am outside of protecting my children and being a mother. So practicing being a woman outside of your mother identity is really helpful for keeping yourself well as your kids grow up. But then it's also helpful for your kids to know that they can practice being an individual if they become parents one day, and that there is so much more to being a person than just being a parent. So I like to think about carving out spaces in our weeks or months or days for practicing our different identities. So one of my identities from, I would call it almost like a former life, was that I was a performance violinist before I became a therapist and studied psychology. And I find that I have a complicated relationship with violin now, but when I make space to play music, a part of me that I can't access when I'm doing therapy or researching or writing or podcasting or whatever, a part of me comes alive and that actually enriches the other parts of my life. So I think there's a scheduling piece about this, which is make the space for you to do the things that are important to you. If you need to carve out some time where you get a babysitter, or you swap babysitting, or you tell your partner that you need some space and time and energy to craft, or to go walk in nature, or to read or write, any of these other parts of your identity, make room for them. Because kind of like anything I was mentioning before, that we are stronger together, think of relationship and power with as something that you can experience within yourself as well, that all of your identities add to each other. There's something that I've heard say, which is change is as good as rest. And while that's not always the case, sometimes we need rest. I think about how when I'm doing things other than therapy, or other than writing books, or other than researching, I actually feel like those other things add to my ability to come back, have a clear head, get insight. It's kind of like what people say about writing music. You can't just sit at home and write music all day. You have to go live your life and have something to write music about. So finding spaces and time to practice, to rehearse, to cultivate these other aspects of our identity is really a survival strategy, and a strategy that helps us enrich the other parts of our lives.
So useful and practical. Let's talk for a minute about trauma. And I know you do a lot of work with individuals who are navigating spiritual trauma. And so, how do you define spiritual trauma? And then, secondly, if someone hears that description and they're like, yep, that's totally me, how do they take the first step toward healing?
I think I would define spiritual trauma as really any kind of trauma. That's my first definition, because I don't think that we can extract the spiritual aspect of our lives from any other part of our lives. So if somebody's been in an abusive marriage, I can't imagine that that would be anything other than spiritual trauma, because it would affect our spirituality. It would affect what we believe about existence and God and love, and how we relate to other people, and the things that connect us all. I can't imagine a person going through a massive car accident and not having spiritual trauma, not feeling like, can I trust God? Are good things going to happen again? Am I safe in the world? And how do I suffer now? And how do I suffer well? So I think there's that piece that I always like to start with, which is that there's no trauma that isn't spiritual. But the second piece is that there's a special kind of trauma that's been showing up in faith communities, where people have been really manipulated and have been hurt, and that's been in conjunction with a faith system. And so because our brain sort of categorizes those things together, we can't extract from our faith system and our beliefs all of those hurts. So it's kind of like when people have been abused as children by their parents, and they think, so how do I go on trusting my parents, knowing that they also hurt me, but they're also the people that provide for me? And so it's this very confusing thing where the person, the being that's supposed to be good, gets all wrapped up in us feeling like a bad person, and believing that we're not safe, and that we can't trust other people. And yeah, there can be some really messy stuff that happens in faith communities because we're all human, and because we're broken, and some people take advantage of other hurting and broken people. So spiritual trauma often, probably in its most extreme form, shows up like sexual abuse that's happened in the church or any other faith community, or things like cult life, where there is this very rigid, psychologically manipulative and brainwashing community, where adherence to a collection of values, strict adherence and devotion is required for membership in that group, and that there's an exclusionary component, and people in the cults are asked to give everything of their time and energy and resources to the support of this cult. And so those would probably be the most extreme forms. But then there are other things like I've seen in certain faith communities where people have been told, your family doesn't believe, and it's getting in the way of your belief. And so cut off relationship with your family. And people have, in order to feel like they get this sense of belonging, have distanced themselves from other people who love them. So spiritual communities can be incredibly life-giving, but also we've seen can be really harmful. And so if people are noticing that they've had some spiritual trauma, I think one of the first things to do is to find some safety wherever you feel safe to start to talk about it. If we think about a person who's in an abusive marriage, what those of us who haven't been in abusive marriages, that we might think like, oh, confront the person or go to therapy. But actually, if there's abuse, that can be one of the worst things to do because it just increases the abuse. So if there's an abusive situation, if there is trauma of any kind, actually one of the first steps is to find safety, to get out and to talk to somebody who can support you, to talk through what is safe, what's not safe, what you've just been through. Sometimes that looks like going to someone who specializes in complex trauma, which is one of the kinds of trauma therapies that I do. So instead of a single incident like a car accident, complex trauma is usually ongoing, relational, psychologically abusive, and involves relationship with people who are also giving you things that are helpful for you, like care or resources or protection. And so it gets very messy about if the people are safe or not safe. So going to somebody who specializes in trauma and complex trauma, particularly spiritual trauma, and finding a way to start your life, to sort through what you've just been through. And maybe the best thing for you to do is to tell a friend, to tell someone you trust, and to tell someone who will believe you about what you've been through, and then get some support to start working through it.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
The question that I'd like to ask all my friends to wrap up is, what is the best advice you never got?
Oh, man. That's such a good question. I can think of lots of things that I kind of heard, but I would have loved to have heard explicitly. It's so funny. I'm doing research for my dissertation around menopause and menstrual cycles. And so that's kind of on the top of my mind. I think the best advice that I never got was, your period is okay and it doesn't make you dirty or shameful. Yes. But then I think like kind of more human and more extensive than that is, you're okay. Like you're okay.
Yes.
Because I think I spent so much time in my life trying to earn my okayness and feeling anxious about if I was doing enough, or if I was lovable, or if I was going to make someone upset, or if they were going to be mad at me. And I just spent so much time being anxious about if I was enough. And the best advice is just to know that you're okay. You've always been okay, and you're always going to be okay. It's all going to work out in the end. If we really believe that grace is bigger than anything, that love is bigger than anything, then you're okay.
Hillary, you're such a gift to the world. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, what an encouraging statement. And I'm so excited to be with you in the fall for MomCon.
Yes, we are thrilled you're going to be there. And I think our moms, there's like word kind of getting out that you're going to be there, and they are just like so stoked about it. So thanks for being willing to come, and thanks for being willing to spend a couple minutes with me recording this. I really am grateful. Hey, thanks so much for listening today. Hillary is going to be at MomCon with us this year, and you definitely want to be there in September. I know maybe there's a narrative in your head saying something like, I don't want to be away from my kids for the weekend, or it's too hard to figure out logistics to travel to Louisville. But here's the thing. I think you should do it anyway. So go to momcon.mops.org and get a ticket and be there in September. Now go out and have more fun, and don't come back until you do.